turn it over to Megan. Go ahead, Megan.
Hi, everyone. Welcome. I'm excited to be here to share. Today, we are going to do the first half of everything you need to know about the hardware and the software to access iPads and make them accessible. I am a full-time assistive technology coordinator for a school in the western suburbs of Chicago, and I also teach assistive technology courses for the University of Wisconsin-Milwaukee and Aurora University. So there's a lot of background coming here. But today, really what I'm going to talk about is all the practical application and how do we actually get our students with the most severe and complex disabilities, the severe access issues, to truly access the iPad. Now that we have more and more remote learning, I know as professionals we're running into the need to really adapt for all of our students. So today I said we're going to do part one. Part two is next week, same day, same time. Today, we're really going to focus on the hardware. Like, what do we really need to make the iPad accessible? What options can we use to plug in switches? What can we really do Bluetooth-wise or hardware plug-in-wise? So I'm going to take a deep dive into 4 different options. These are just the options that I own and have physically to show you. But then I'm also going to mention some resources of 5 other viable options. So all in all, we're going to talk about quite a few. But really, before we even get into this, I want to talk about what are we even doing this for? What potential does the iPad really have? And there's really a lot. As you can see here on the right side of the screen, this is a student I actually just spent the morning with. We have him set up just with an iPad on a mount and 2 switches. There's a switch here on the left. There's another little yellow one on the right side of his tray. And what he's doing is just flipping the pages of a book back and forth. So we're using 2 switches to turn the pages, which is a nice stepping stone if you're hoping to make some communication switch accessible, communication devices. It's kind of like a helpful step in the switch progression of 2 switches, either for a different purpose or 2 switches working together for a single purpose, like turning the pages. So I'm going to show you really quickly the video that I created to show the teachers how to set up his iPad ready for him. So this is kind of the training. And really, the reason I'm showing you this video right now is to show you how easy it is for our teachers to use the iPad or for parents to use the iPad once we do some of the background programming. So this is all they need to know.
This is a quick tutorial on using Epic with switch control to turn the pages. Right now, our Hitch 2 is set up on the orange level with a switch programmed into the left arrow and a switch plugged into the right arrow. This will be our turn pages left and right. Go ahead and open up Epic. Click on Epic. I recommend starting with a Read to Me book. I'm going to go with 5 Little Monkeys as an example. The book will automatically start to read when it is opened. In order to make this switch accessible, all you need to do is triple click 1, 2, 3 on the home, and you will see that the iPad basic switch recipe will launch. At that time, all our students have to do are click their switches to turn the pages, and they can turn the pages back. If they want to hear a certain page read over and over again, they can just do that by switching back and forth.
So again, the reason I showed that video was to show you that video is all I present to teachers, and that video is what I show to parents, and that's all they need to know to make the iPad work for their students. Now, in order to get all that set up, that's what we're going to talk about from the rest of this session, and part of the next one is how do we as the professionals help set up the iPads so that it is that easy for parents to just do a little triple click on the home button, or for the teachers to do a little triple click on the home button to make the iPad that accessible. I see someone raise their hand and I can't see you. So if you have a question, go ahead and put it in the question and answer section and we'll get those addressed. Okay, so here's my little disclaimer about the rest of this presentation. The hardware items that we're going to talk about today are just some of the options. It's not every single option out there. These are just the ones I've tried and I've found to work. There are probably additional hardware options out there. I just haven't tried them all. I haven't had the opportunity to buy them all. So a lot of what I'm going to talk about is kind of, you can generalize to some other options. This is just what I'm most familiar with. Okay. Also, some of these are kind of like hacks. We're kind of hacking the iPad to get it to work the way we want. So part of the disclaimer is I don't know if all these options will always work with iOS. There might be some update that changes something, but they have been working for years. So hopefully they will continue to work. And finally, I do want to mention I have not experimented with every single Switch accessible communication app. So this presentation isn't necessarily talking about the apps that are already Switch accessible. I'm going to talk about some of the ways to make inaccessible apps more Switch accessible. Okay, so the hardware options that I'm going to talk about the most, really take that deep dive, are the Hook Plus and the Bluetooth switch. I'm also going to talk about an option with the Don Johnston Switch Interface Pro with an adapter and the Hitch 2 Switch Interface with another adapter. And I'll get into pictures and all the limitations of these. So the first one I want to talk about is the AbleNet Hook Plus. So the AbleNet Hook Plus is one piece that you can buy actually directly from AbleNet. This is nice. One of the positives about this is that you can quickly just plug it in the iPad and then you directly plug up to 4 different switches into the Hook Plus. So it's kind of one of the more foolproof adapters, or the quickest ways to make an iPad Switch accessible. You don't need a battery, or you can charge the iPad while this is in, which is nice because it has the charging port on the bottom in case your iPad is dead. And because they actually worked with Apple on this, it's developed to work with all the iOS systems. So it can actually wake up a sleeping iPad. So if the iPad has gone to sleep, a student can hit their switch to actually wake up the iPad, which is nice. You can also use a keyboard without conflict because it is a direct hardwire into the iPad. You can still have a Bluetooth keyboard hooked up to the iPad working at the same time. One of the limitations of this, and we'll get into the positives and limitations of all these different hardware options, is that you can only plug in 4 switches at a time, which sounds like a lot because we don't usually have students using more than 4 switches at a time. But when you get into some of the advanced programming and some of the programming that we're going to talk about next week, you'll see that even though your student only uses 1 or 2 switches at a time, you can actually do some background programming of like 6 to 10 different switches or different functions at a time. So when I say there's only 4 programmable switches, that means there's only 4 different functions you can program on the iPad. With some of the other devices, we can program 10 plus options or different tasks. One thing I wanted to mention is that the first 2 switches are programmed for the step scanning on the iPad. When you plug it in, I guess this could be a positive too. The moment you plug it in, this automatically sets up a few, the first 2 switches to do that step scanning, kind of like the next, select, which is a great way to scan through the iPad. However, I know that many of my students aren't at the level where they're familiar with that 2 switch step scanning. And a lot of my students have to go back to the kind of the cause and effect level. Another thing is that it is a unit tasker. I say this because it is only meant to plug into the iPad, where some of the other ones we're going to talk about aren't. It's about $220. And right now, the Hook Plus that I own has that lightning cable. So it will not work with the USB-C plug, which is what the new iPad Pros are using. So let me show you really quick the YouTube video that you can access that explains the Hook Plus a little bit more. And then we will move on to one of our other tools. Just kidding, I love technology. If you're curious about the Hook Plus more, go ahead and visit the AbleNet website. Here's some more information though about the AbleNet Hook Plus. the one switch will automatically configure, just like I said. If you plug in one switch, it'll automatically configure to a single switch automatic scanning. If you plug in two switches, it'll automatically configure to the step scanning. And this will talk about the auto configuration.
Writing's not that easy, but Grammarly can help.
Yes.
This sentence is grammatically correct.
Hey everyone, Joe from Enabling here today with the Hook Plus iOS switch interface. I'm going to show you how to quickly get it set up on your iPhone or iPad with iOS switch control using the auto configuration. All right, let's go ahead and get started with the auto configuration of iOS switch control with Hook Plus. What we have here is the Hook Plus iOS switch interface, 2 Jelly Bean switches, and an iPad. So I'm going to go ahead and flip Hook Plus over here. What you'll find on the back are switch jacks 1, 2, 3, and 4. Today we're going to use 2 switches to do 2 switch step scanning. Switch jack 1 here will automatically configure to select item, and switch jack 2 will automatically configure to move to next item. So I'm going to go ahead and plug in this green switch into the move to next item switch jack 2, and our red switch into switch jack 1, which will be select item. Now I'm going to go into the settings app here and just show you what happens if you go to general, accessibility, switch control. What you see here is switch control is turned off and there are no switches configured. As soon as I plug in Hook Plus, you're going to see that switch control turns on and the 2 switches automatically configure.
Now, what Joe just talked about in that video, which is super handy, he talks about how the switches automatically configure. This session, this first part, I'm pretty much just talking about ones that auto configure and talking about the standard programming. In next week's session, I'll actually show you how to add switches in manually and even how to delete switches or change the programming and change the function of each of those switches. So this is sort of the beginner right now, and we'll get into a lot more of the advanced programming next week.
So my green switch will now move and my red switch will now select.
Okay, so that is how the Hook Plus works. One thing that's also really neat about the Hook Plus is in port 3 and 4, as soon as you plug a switch into number 3 or 4, it's a blank slate, so you can easily program them to your liking. For example, the video that I showed in the very beginning where you could turn the pages left or right, it's really, really easy to take switches, plug it in the number 3 and 4, go into the programming of the iPad and do a left and right swipe for that number 3 and 4 switch. So it'd be really easy to have a student using 2 switches to 2 switch step scan through the iPad, and then easily unplug those switches, plug it into the other side of the Hook Plus, and then they could flip pages of the book. So it does make it nice and accessible. Okay, the other switch I wanted to talk about was the Bluetooth switch. One of the positives is that this is wireless. So you don't have any students getting caught in the wires, which can be nice. You can also plug in 2 switches. There are 2 ports here. If you need head switches or something else, you can plug in a switch and then reposition the switch if you need alternate positioning. Now, here's one of the things I was talking about, the programming possibilities. Because there are 6 different modes on this, each switch mode or each mode has a white and the orange switch, and each white and orange on each different mode can be programmed as a different function. So we can tell the iPad on one mode to do a left and right swipe. On a different mode, we can program it to do a tap the screen. On another mode, we can say, draw this circle and a line through it. And what's really exciting about that is depending how you program the iPad, we can really make many, many different apps accessible. I have some students using a spin art app and made that accessible, where I program the iPad to press in a certain area, which would pick a color. And then I have it draw like a circle shape, which squeezes the paint out on the Spin Art app, and then there's another area where it hits to start and stop the Spin Art. So by being able to program different functions in the iPad, we can really make a lot of things accessible. And that's one of the definite benefits of this, is because it has so many different modes, you can easily program 6 different functions on the iPad, and up to 10 even if you program those extra modes. Also, it'll work with all iPads using the Lightning connection or the USB-C, because it's Bluetooth, so it doesn't matter. One limitation is that it requires the battery to be charged, which I know some of my students struggle to program or to charge their communication devices every night, let alone the Bluetooth switch adapter. It is an extra step just to make sure everything's connected well. One limitation is that there's only 2 switch ports, which means you can only use 2 switches at a time. I don't know if you ever want to try to have a student use 3 switches at a time, but that would be this. And the final is that it is also a unitasker, and it costs about $220. Here's the official AbleNet video on the Bluetooth.
This is the checkers game where grandson and granddad will bond.
Hello, my name is Mike, and today I'm going to talk about the Bluetooth switch. The Bluetooth switch provides single or dual switch access to iDevices running iOS 7 or newer, Apple desktop or laptop computers running OS X 10.9 or newer, and all switch accessible apps or software on iOS, OS X, Windows, and Android. Bluetooth features a rechargeable battery and 2 external switch jacks, so a user can plug in any 2 switches they frequently use. Setting up your Bluetooth switch is easy. To begin, turn the Bluetooth device on. Then, turn on your Bluetooth connection on your iPad. Once it's on, it will search for Bluetooth devices in range. When the Bluetooth displays, tap on it so it begins pairing the Bluetooth switch with the iPad. Once the Bluetooth is paired with your iPad, you will need to set it up with switch control in order to perform scanning functions. To do this, you'll go into Settings, General, Accessibility, Switch Control, Switches. Then, select Add New Switch and select External. Once prompted, activate a switch and name it. We recommend giving the switch an intuitive name like Orange Switch, so you can identify it at a later time. Choose the function you'd like the switch to perform. Today, we're choosing Select Item. We're also going to do the same for the other switch, except we're going to name it White Switch and choose Move to Next Item as the function. Now that the switch control features have been set up, I am able to navigate through the iPad using Bluetooth switch. To learn more about the Bluetooth switch from
Okay, as you saw in that video, the Bluetooth switch does require a little bit more programming than Hook Plus. It doesn't auto configure like last one did. But what's nice about these 2 switches, when you saw that he went in, he named each switch, each external switch, and then he assigned it a function. So anytime you make a new switch, you can assign that function. He did the, select or the move to next item. As I showed in the video, either I had swipe screen left to right and swipe from right to left. So you can assign different functions to the different switches. And that's really how we program the iPad. Now, I know we're kind of touching on the programming as we're talking. Like I said, the next session will go just purely into programming. I'm focusing a little more on the hardware now. So I don't want you to feel like I'm not giving you everything you want. There's just a lot to cover at once. I did have a question off topic just for a second. Somebody asked if I had found a way to allow students to choose a book on Epic with the switches. I think technically you could do 2 switch step scanning to scan through different books. Personally, my student that I had flipping the pages as a book, is not at the level cognitively or physically where he can do the 2 switch step scanning yet. So right now we use partner assisted scanning, and I help scan through, and he chooses a book he wants. And then once we choose that book, then he's able to turn the pages on his own. So depending who your student is and what level they're at, you might want to try some different activities once you have access on the iPad. Okay, so that was the Bluetooth switch. I want to focus on now some of the fun stuff that maybe you haven't tried before. This is one of my favorites. This is the Don Johnson Switch Interface Pro. Many of you may have some of these hiding around in the closet, or maybe you have some in a classroom. They have been around forever, and they're one of my most favorite switch interfaces ever. What's really exciting is we can actually adapt this to make the iPad switch accessible. So the other 2 from AbleNet are marketed as a switch interface. This is a switch interface with the USB connection. So this was marketed for a computer switch interface, but we can, like I said, adapt it to make an iPad switch accessible. Unfortunately, they're no longer available for purchase, but don't worry, I have another option. But if you are able to find any of these around your school, this is one of my favorites. All I had to do was then purchase the Apple camera adapter, this small little USB adapter to Lightning. It was about $29. Apple, this is the actual Apple branded one. And they market it as a camera adapter, but it actually works phenomenal for this tool. So there's a link there if you want to buy just this USB adapter. You can try an off-brand, like a non-Apple brand. It may work. I just haven't tried it yet, so I can't tell you because I purchased this one and it worked just fine. So I'm sticking with it personally. So here's what's really exciting about this Don Johnson switch interface with the adapter. It is the most cost-effective option that I'm sharing because all I had to do was buy the $29, and hopefully you have one of these around your school too. You might already have it. It does allow you to plug in multiple switches and program so many functions for each switch. There are actually 5 ports here. So technically, you could get a student using 5 switches at once if that was something you needed. Maybe if you're doing like a garage band or a music app, you could have a student playing 5 different music notes. Like there's a lot of possibilities with this. So what's really neat too is the flexibility for the student and the parent and the school. Since the switch interface can be used on the iPad, it can also be used to access the computer. So with just one set of technology, you're able to access the computer and iPad and basically anything else. You could have a student reading books on the iPad, and then you could go to YouTube and have them press the play pause button and click next song. So it gives them just one set of hardware, gives a lot of flexibility, which is something I love, a lot of bang for your buck. Speaking of a lot of bang for your buck, there are actually 18 different programmable switches on here. So by using all the different modes and all the different areas that you can plug in a switch, you can program an iPad to do 18 different functions. So that is a lot of, like, you could do, next item select, you can do flipping the pages left or right, and you can do a lot of custom gestures and a lot of custom recipes, which again, we'll talk about later. But this really opens up the book, or opens up the iPad to making almost anything accessible. I did also buy the Apple USB to USB-C adapter, like for the iPad Pro, how it has that new, not the Lightning plug, but the USB-C. And this did work with that, which is very nice. Limitations. Right now, using this adapter, you can't charge the iPad at the same time, but another adapter I have does. It does take some programming and organization. Because this was designed for computer accessibility, the different tabs on here are like space, enter, tab, shift tab, backspace, up, down, arrows, enter. They're labeled for computer functions, or keyboard functions. So it does take some organization on your part as the programmer, and it does take some programming that you have to go in and assign each one of these keyboard functions to have a different function on the iPad, like that swipe or that custom gesture. So it does take some background programming, but fear not, I have directions for that later. So I guess you could say that's a limitation, but it doesn't bother me at all. I am going to say honestly though, another thing, it's not Apple approved, which means maybe in iOS 20, there's some update that makes these keyboard functions not work the way we want them to, but I've been doing it for years using this, and it's been working well, and I've updated to the most recent updates and it's still functioning. So it's still a good worth use of time and effort. The only other limitation is you can only use it if you already own it, because unfortunately Don Johnson, the company, is only doing online software now and not hardware. Like I said, never fear, there is another option. But option number 4, I guess, in our deep dive, and this is actually the Hitch 2 switch interface. This one can be purchased from AbleNet, which is where I got it. It functions basically just the same as the Don Johnson switch interface, but it's one you can actually purchase. This Hitch 2 is $99, and then I ended up purchasing this adapter. For some reason, the single adapter didn't work, but magically, when I got the 3-prong adapter, the Hitch 2 was able to work. Again, I don't know why, but all I'm telling you, I'm going back to my disclaimer, was this is what worked for me. It's been working for a while, so I'm sticking with it. This is the adapter that I purchased off Amazon. It is an off-brand, so it's actually cheaper. It's only about $20, and it's worked really well. And it does have the ability to charge at the same time, so it's kind of nice. So positives of this setup is that it is cost effective. It only costs about $120. This is actually what we did for our district when we went fully remote in the beginning of the year. We ended up purchasing 30 sets of this to provide for our students to take home, those that needed switch accessibility to their iPads. So this was the setup we went with. I do like it because it allows you to plug in multiple switches, just like on that Don Johnson, and you can have a different function for each. Again, it gives you that same flexibility of where my students can use this in the iPad, but they can also use this in their computer. Again, I use that example of the play, pause, and the next on YouTube videos, but the space bar, I'm 90% sure it's the space bar, will do the play, pause on YouTube, and then I take the cursor of my mouse and hover it over the next button on YouTube. And then I put the switch interface on a click. So they're able to press one switch, the space to play, pause, and then the click will move them to the next. And that allows my students to interact a little more with YouTube than they would have been able to otherwise. So another benefit of this is you can purchase all these tools now if you need them. So you're able to set up iPads sooner than later to get them accessible. You can charge the iPad at the same time because one of the ports is a charging port. I also did purchase a USB-C, because again, this is the lightning adapter, but I did purchase a USB-C and I tried it with the new iPad Pros and it did work. So the Hitch 2 did work with the 3-prong or the 3-port adapter. So again, similar to the last one, limitations, it does take some programming and organization. Again, just because this isn't the intended purpose of it, we're using this multitasker. It does take some programming, just like I mentioned before. Again, it's not 100% Apple approved, so maybe in iOS 20, it might not work. I don't know. I can't guarantee it. And one limitation a little bit is that there's only 6 programmable switches on it. The way that the iPad works is you can program a keyboard stroke to be a switch. And what happens on here is the whole first row of the Hitch 2 are mouse commands and then clicks. So mouse commands and some of the clicks don't work as well. The left click, right click, and double left click. Those are not programmable options. So really out of the box, there's 6 programmable options, and then you can program the bottom row if you want. So it doesn't have quite as many as the Don Johnson, but again, you can actually purchase it now if you aren't able to find the Don Johnson. So really quick, I wanted to mention things that did not work for me. I tried this one switch interface from the ATEC, and I was not able to get that to work with an iPad, no matter what adapter I worked with. And for some reason, this 2-prong adapter with the camera and the lightning did not work. It did not work with the Hitch 2. For some reason, I had to move all the way up to the 3-prong adapter for it to work. Again, I'm not sure why, but please just take advantage of the fact that I have purchased way too many adapters and tried plugging everything into everything. So learn from my mistakes and just go with what worked. Okay, so that was my overview of that's the deep dive of the hardware I own. Let me take just a moment. Does anyone have any questions about the 4 options I went through? So we had the Hook Plus, the Bluetooth, which are actually designed for switch accessibility. And then we have the Switch Interface Pro from Don Johnson and the Hitch 2, that with those adapters, we were able to make switch accessible. So those are the main things I've been working with. Which one is the easiest to program was a question. Very good question. The most foolproof is probably the Hook 2, because you plug it in and it does the auto configuration. If you're doing the 2 switch step scanning, this is by far the easiest. But to be honest with you, many of my students, actually 99.9% of my students who need switch accessibility to the iPad are more at the cause effect level. And maybe just a few we're working on, like those 2 switches for a different purpose, like the turning the pages. Most of my other students are just the single switch cause effect. And I found them all to be equally programmable, but maybe that's just because I've played around with them a lot. If you, like I said, if you have students who are at the cause effect level, I would actually probably recommend the Hitch 2, because 1, you can purchase it right away. And even though it takes a little bit of practice with the programming, it gives you the most flexibility. Where if you want to do cause effect with the Hook 2, you actually have to go in and delete the automatic programming they have and then program it again. So it just kind of depends what student you have or what needs your client has as to which would be best. Okay, really quick, I wanted to jump into, well, not really quick, I'll take a moment on each of them, I promise. Some other viable options. These are valid options for switch interfaces and iPad accessibility. I just don't own them, so I can't show them to you, and I haven't tried them. So I'll tell you they exist. Try them if you want. All I can do is tell you what I know. This one is the Tapio. I'll go ahead and show it to you really quick. It's a small little USB plug-in for switches. It technically just has 1 port. This little black spot in the back is just 1 port for 1 switch, but you can purchase an adapter that allows you to put 2 switches in. So this is really nice and pretty easy. Again, they have that same sort of adapter that I showed you guys. It was originally designed for computers, but you can plug it into an iPad with the adapters. Here are some videos about switch control abilities and options. This shows you how to set it up with one. Here's some other switch control options. I'm actually going to show you really quickly the switch control options that they have, just because it's a general overview of iPad options in switch control. It just happens to be on their website. But I did also want to let you know the Tapio, you can purchase another adapter that splits the port so you can plug in 2 switches. So let's just take this video for a moment so we can learn a little bit more about the standard options that are built into the iPad.
Hey guys, so in this video I'm going to show you all the different features that switch control has to offer and the ways in which you can change them to make switch control work best for you. First major feature in switch control is auto scanning, and when auto scanning is on, it means that your cursor will automatically move to the next item without you having to touch it at all. And so it's very useful if you're using just one Orbi switch, but it isn't necessarily that useful if you're using two Orbi switches like I am now, because I have the green switch set to move to next item. So when you turn auto scanning on, a couple of different things are going to pop up here. The first is auto scanning time, which is the amount of time the cursor is going to remain on each item before it moves to the next one. And then pause on first item is the amount of time it's going to wait on the first item after you select something. And then lastly, loops is the amount of time that your cursor will visit every single item on a page before it hides the cursor. So as you can see, it's going to go all the way down to the very bottom. And then since I just set it to one loop, the cursor is going to hide. And then to get the cursor back and start scanning again, all you have to do is simply tap your button. So after auto scanning, the next major feature is something called auto tap. And auto tap is a feature that when it's on, it means that when you go to select something, let's say, like, for example, if we select Safari, the second you select it, it will automatically just open up the app. But if you have auto tap off, when you go to select something like Safari, it'll open up a little menu that has a bunch of different options, but then sort of open up the app, you'll have to tap it again. So the next option on the switch control page is the move repeat option, and what this allows you to do is specify the amount of time your move to next item switch can be held down before it moves to the next item. So I have my green switch set up for move to next item, and right now at the default half a second, if I hold it down every half second, it's going to move to the next item. And so this feature is really useful if you're someone who likes to hold down the button for a very long time. So if I make this longer, and right now it's at exactly 4 seconds, now I'll hold this down and every 4 seconds, it will switch to the next item. And so after move repeat, the next feature is called hold duration. And what this allows you to do is specify the amount of time you have to hold down your switch for it to select something. So this is really useful if you're someone who might accidentally bump your switches a lot, so that it doesn't just keep selecting things because you have to hold it down for a certain amount of time before it will do. And so next, after the hold duration, is ignore repeat. And what this allows you to do is hit your button multiple times within a certain amount of time and only have it count as a single input. So this is a really cool feature if you're someone who has trouble just hitting the button once. And so right now I have it set to 1 second. And so say if I'd like to go back to the switch control page, if I accidentally hit it twice, it's only going to count as one single selection and it's not going to go back twice, but just once. And so next, after ignore repeat, under point scanning, there's going to be something called gliding cursor speed, but we don't need to worry about that since we're using switches. And then next, under audio, you can turn on sound effects, which gives a nice little sound effect noise every time you move your cursor. And then after that, we can do speech.
General through privacy,
which will read off the title of every different item your cursor is on. So next, after the audio section, is the included menu items. And what this allows you to do is customize that little menu that pops up when auto tap is off when you try to select something. So that menu right there. And then after that is group items. And what this does is group the different items, like right there, so you don't have to individually scan through all of them. And then after that, under visual, large cursor just makes your cursor more visible, and then cursor color just allows you to change the color of your cursor. Right now we have it set to blue. And then save gestures allows you to create different gestures like that, and you can save them with different names. We'll just call this one. And you can access these different gestures on that little menu that pops up like that.
Okay, so I know that that video was technically under the Tapio, but I wanted to show it to you because everything that she just talked about is a switch scanning option for every single switch scanning out there. It doesn't matter what hardware you're using, those are just some of the built-in features that you can use on the iPad. And there's some features there that I think a lot of people didn't necessarily know about. Someone asked about students with CVI. Like, I would definitely turn the click on so that they know that they're scanning through. That would be something. You could also turn the speech on so that they can get more feedback. One setting I wanted to mention, the very last thing she talked about was those custom gestures. She did a 2-finger swipe. You could draw a star. You could do a tap tap in many different places. That's actually something that I'm going to talk a whole lot about in our next session, because we can create custom gestures. We can make overlays, create custom gestures that align with just about any app. We can make those apps interactive. But then what's really exciting is we can program a custom recipe in the iPad, where when we hit a switch, it does a series of custom gestures or a series of different things at the same time. And that's what really makes the iPads accessible. So I just wanted to give you a little taste of some of the options to come. I also wanted to talk a little bit about a couple of those questions that came up. One person said that they have their school used the Tapio for the plug and play, that single switch, just plug in and play. It is very easy for just that single switch, make it go. I personally like the Hitch 2 or the Don Johnson or even the Bluetooth and the Hook Plus more, because it allows me to program so many different functions to be used at the same time. And that's what I was talking about. When we get into those custom recipes, I can create one recipe that has like 4 different switch functions. So when we do that triple click to turn on a recipe, to turn on that switch control, I can have the iPad program so that the point up arrow is a tap middle of the screen. The left arrow is a turn page of the book, one way, and the right arrow is another way. So basically I do a whole bunch of programming in the background. So all my teachers have to do is triple click to turn the iPad on. And then depending where they plug the switch in, they know that the switch will do different things in different ports. So for me, when you want to use the iPad for a lot of different functions, using one of these adapters, actually any of the 4 I discussed today, is a little more functional than just the single of the Tapio. But it is very nice. I did highlight, I made this one a little bit bigger. It's that nice video on switch control options. Again, those are switch control options that are available with any switch control hardware. It was just a nice opportunity to show that to you. Next one I wanted to talk about was the Praetorian applicator. I have not used this, but I have seen a lot of good things about it. I'm going to jump to it really quickly just to show you. This is a product. I have not purchased it in American dollars, but I know some people in the US have used it. There are a lot of great features. It is designed to be to make iPad switch accessible. So there's a lot of neat functions in it. There are some links here that I suggest. Toby Dynavox has worked with this company, so they set it up with their devices too. So you can get some tech support from them. What's really neat about this though is, as I mentioned, that Don Johnson switch interface had like 18 different keyboard commands that you could program. This Praetorian actually has 24 different keyboard commands. So theoretically, you could program a whole bunch on here. I guess it also has a quick media button that has some pre-configured access like play and pause and skip forward if you're looking for some access like on a YouTube app. So if you got the funds for it, it's worth a try. It's worth looking into. I just haven't had the opportunity to do it yet. Next, I wanted to mention the stealth switch. I put a question mark next to this because it does use keyboard commands, so it should work. But this stealth switch is more, I think it was more designed as a gamer switch. But again, looking at the background of it and how it functions, it should work exactly like any of the other switch interfaces. I do also want to mention RJ Cooper. He has a Bluetooth switch, and the keyboard commands on that are space and enter. So again, the space and enter can be programmed on the iPad, just like the space and enter can be programmed on here or on the Don Johnson. So anytime there's a keyboard command, anytime a Bluetooth device or a plug-in device provides a keyboard command, that is the background programming that we need to make the iPad switch accessible. There's also some information on that RJ Cooper site for the voiceover and switch control. And if you have some students who need switch accessibility, I would recommend looking at that RJ Cooper site too, because there's some really fun stuff. I think he even had a Guitar Hero that he made switch accessible, and some other iPod players, you know, to access music. He's a really fun guy that's got some interesting technology there. And then I put a lot of question marks next to the Tekla. I think that's how you say it. So this, it allows you to control like environmental things via an app. So it's designed for people with limited mobility. It should give you access to iOS switch controls, but again, I haven't tried it. It's something pretty new. This isn't applicable for the students I have, but it was something when I was doing my research that kind of came up. So I just wanted to mention it as if you have a client using this, you might be able to do it. It might take some playing around with. All right, let me answer a couple questions really quick, and then I'll talk a little bit more about programming in the last 15 minutes. Someone asked about a cortical vision impairment student, and they were looking for, have I ever done splitting so that one switch is for single switch access to a cause effect toy and another one provides some sensory feedback like vibration? Actually, one thing I would recommend that I've tried with some of my cortical vision impairments or students with CVI, I actually used, you can program a Big Mac or a step-by-step to be a switch. So when you have the Big Mac, there's a way, you either, I can't remember it off the top of my head, but if you have the adapter cord plugged in, you can actually program it so that it's a switch where when you hit the Big Mac, it will talk, and at the same time, it will also activate, it'll also function as a switch and activate another toy. If you read the directions, it's available, like I said, on a step-by-step or Big Mac. I've always liked that because it right there, since it's a Big Mac, my CVI students can hear it. They hear the click, they feel the click, they're used to that click, but they also get that really strong auditory feedback of whatever it is that you record on the Big Mac or the step-by-step along with activating. So that's a way around it. There are some switches out there. If you look, Enabling Devices has some pretty neat switches. AbleNet obviously has like the Jelly Beans or some other switches that give that tactile feedback, but I'm pretty sure Enabling Devices actually has a vibrating switch that when you activate it, it vibrates along with activating something else. So with your CVI students, I would play around with that, but mostly the Big Mac is what I found the most success with. Okay, any other questions? Again, this is mostly just the hardware. We will talk a lot about the programming next time, but I did want to leave you just, I couldn't leave without a little bit of programming. I wanted to mention, so today I talked a little bit about the one switch automatic scanning, which will set up automatically if you just plug one switch into the Hook Plus. There are two switch step scanning, which is what you've seen a lot of examples, like on the video I showed about the Bluetooth, talked about two switch scanning. When you plug two switches into the Hook Plus, it automatically configures for two switch scanning. Those are kind of the built-in features in the iPad, the switch accessibility that's automatically built in to the iOS systems, I believe starting from where they say like iOS 7. Those are for some of your, I would say, higher functioning students that have the ability to either use the voiceover or access the screen through vision and being able to actually know like next, select. That's great if you have those students. I'll talk about it a little more, but next week I'm going to talk about numbers 3, 4, and 5, about like those various gestures and getting different movements programmed in and custom gestures and recipes. But let me just talk a little bit more about that 1 and 2 switch scanning, because these are the standard, like I said, the standard programming that's involved in the iOS. AbleNet does have this nice handout, I guess. It's kind of everything you need to know about switch accessibility. When I was playing around with switch accessibility in the beginning, I used this kind of as a reference guide, even though, like I said, I mostly use the Don Johnson and the Hitch 2. This manual kind of just has all the information you need to know about switch accessibility, and it really helped me to learn some of the custom gestures and work on some of the other features. So if you look through this manual, it's designed right now for the Bluetooth, but it'll give you all the information you need about how to configure switches, either automatically. It'll talk about the single switch step scanning. So what's really nice about this is it talks about all the settings, and it talks how to configure the switch. It's really a really good step-by-step guide. No matter what hardware you're using, this is still a really good resource to setting up switch accessibility. Some of the things that it covers is the auto configuration. Like I said, that's in the Hook Plus, but it also tells you how to configure a single switch auto scan, a single switch step scan, and a dual switch step scanning, like that 2 switch step scanning. And the directions in here, again, will work on any piece of hardware you plug in, because it just tells you how to do the programming. So that's very nice. The other topics covered in the manual are kind of similar to that video that we watched on that Tapio website about all the options. In the audio scanning, it'll talk about what the pause on first item means, or how many loops if you're scanning through on the auto scan, or what a long press does. The long press is actually pretty exciting. This came out not just in the auto scanning, but in the iPad in general. The long press actually allows you to program the iPad where if you do a single tap, it functions as one function, but if you do a long press, the iPad thinks you're pressing a different switch, so it actually functions, it makes it a different function, or it can give you a different accessibility. So that's a way to turn one switch into 2 separate functions. Maybe a tap could be turn the page this way, and a long press could be turn the page that way. Or a tap can be a tap the middle of the screen, but a long press can be like a swipe up. You can actually program the iPad to have 2 different functions depending how you tap the switch. So that's pretty exciting. The manual also talks about, like I said, the single switch step scanning and the 2 switch step scanning. But actually, like I said, if you're looking for something more, like a lot of my students really just need the cause and effect, or they just need the turning the pages of an ebook. I have a question up here, like, what are you guys hoping to access? And this is actually something that we're going to talk about in part 2 of the presentation just next week. I'm going to go through, I have all the step-by-step process of how you, on your own, add a switch to an iPad, how you program it for a gesture or a custom gesture. And then once you have all your switches programmed, I show you how to combine them all in a recipe so that all we have to do is triple click to turn it on, and then this iPad is switch accessible. So take this time between now and next week, try to scrounge around, see if you can find any adapters, bring some of your switch accessible hardware, and we can do some programming next week, which is the really fun part. I did want to mention though, there are a lot of iPad apps that are already accessible. So these are the apps and communication devices that don't need a lot of custom programming. They won't need the custom gestures or the custom recipes. They're often accessible just with the 2 switch step scanning or the built-in scanning on the iPad. So if you're looking for some already accessible apps, enabling devices right here, this is a really nice compilation of just switch accessible apps. This is a great resource. So just go ahead and look at this, and you can see on the left are a whole bunch of different apps from various suppliers, from various companies. that are just already switch accessible. You can look through that. MarbleSoft is another company I used a lot for computer switch activities, and they also do have some app switch activities, so you can look at MarbleSoft. Judy Lynn Software, again, I use them a ton for computer accessibility, but there are, as you can see here, there are some apps that you can purchase, which are nice. Life Tool Solutions has some, here's a link to them. Inclusive TLC, we have quite a few of these actually. I think the Big Bang patterns and pictures are some we own. These, the Space Shooter, all these listed are also really nice kind of cause effect ones. Oh, sorry. My school district also has a license, or we have Help Kids Learn. There's many apps on this website, the Help Kids Learn, and also L3 Skills. This is from News to You, or the Unique Learning System. L3 Skills is an extra buy-on that you can, or an added-on purchase. It does have a lot of single switch cause effect activities. So I'm going to actually show that next week. I have a video on that that just shows how we program the iPad for the up arrow to be just to tap the middle of the screen. And once you have that, then all the L3 skills on the iPad are accessible. I mentioned RJ Cooper before, but he does have a couple apps, so you can look into that. And then there are communication devices that are switch accessible on the iPad. I know for sure that the Go Talk Now touch chat from Celtillo and the Lamp Words for Life, like the PRC device, those are switch accessible. So you can definitely use those with some of those basic switch accessibility functions that are already built into the iPad. Finally, I wanted to mention my favorite mount. These are fabulous. Hey, we're talking all about functionality today. And this is one of my new favorite mounts. It's from Modular Hose, or the Lockline guys. You may have seen them before because Lockline is this more flexible material. I use it like for cell phone holders, or I use it to actually hold the switches for many of my kids, many of the head positions. I love it for assessment because I can very easily change the position to see where my students need their switch to be accessed. But then this only came out maybe just a couple years ago, but from the same company. It's easy to use where you can loosen it and change the positioning, but once you tighten it, it's a pretty rigid mount, and it costs about a third of the price of some of the other rigid mounts out there. So I would definitely explore this website if you're looking for some mounting options. Okay, give it a whirl, jump right in, make it fun. iPads can be a little tricky, and the only way to really make this work for your students is just to sit down and try programming some stuff. Again, if you're looking for more directions on the programming, come next week. Today was pretty much the hardware. Next week is going to be all the programming. I'll have a lot more videos about how to program, where we press, how we assign things and create those custom gestures and recipes. I'm going to take just a couple minutes to answer questions. So go ahead and pop anything in if you have any questions about hardware. And like I said, I'm really looking forward to next week. Sorry I couldn't give you everything all in once. There was just a lot of content to go over, just physically the hardware to make an iPad switch accessible. So the links to the mount is at this, the modularhose.com /assistive technology. If you go here to their website, and this was one of the questions. The modular hose is the bendable one. This MOGO mounting, this metal, the modular metal arms is what I use to hold iPads, or if I want the switch to have a really rigid mount. So that's that MOGO modular hose is right there. Next week is also through AbleNet, just the same way you signed up for this session. You can go ahead and sign up for next session, because I know that's kind of what some of you are interested in. I guess there's just a lot to cover. Okay. So let me see, Deb, if there's any questions that you've seen I need to answer.
I don't
jump right
see any
in.
other questions that you haven't answered. Oh, one just came in. What about what mount is best for students with high tone?
I like the rigid mounts personally, for a lot of the students with high tone, but sometimes I use a soft switch so that they don't hurt themselves. What I found is some of my students who, like, we never want to use an AT&R reflex for them to hit the mount, but some of those kids that kind of present with who struggle physically often have to like wind up or a little more aggressive with their switches or with their mounts. So I have actually found that this rigid mount has been the best for me, but definitely work with your occupational therapist and physical therapist on that and explore. This modular hose team actually has some assistive technology, like you can buy an assessment kit that comes with a lot of different pieces. So I did start with the assessment kit initially, just so I could play around with different lengths and different options for different kids. As you can see on the bottom of this one, there's a clamp, but they actually have 3 different types of clamps. There's a much stronger rigid clamp that I've used for some of my students. Once I find a better position, I just kind of use this clamp like for more assessment purposes so I can move it around easier. Again, if you have a question, throw it into the question and answer section because it's a little easier to get to. There's a lot in the chat, so it's hard to look through. Somebody said that they've been able to access the modular hose assessment kit through their state AT program lending library. You could always look into that, but honestly, the price on this modular hose is a lot of bang for your buck. So I've actually been able to get this for all my kids in my district. This is basically the only mounting system we use in our district, just because we're able to purchase it. Plus they're right here in Illinois, so sometimes I buy the guys lunch and they just drive it out to me so I don't have to pay for shipping. Yeah, I'll stay on for a minute if anybody has any other questions. I know today was a lot about the hardware, but you have to find an option that works for you before we can actually get in and start programming the software, the programming behind making the switch, iPad switch accessible.
All right, I don't see any other questions, Megan.
Fabulous. It's been a pleasure, and I hope to see most of you next week.
Yeah, thanks for all the great information, and we are looking forward to next week. We will end the meeting for now. Thanks.
Thanks.